Elon Musk is the world's richest man. He's just scraped together $4 billion of spare change to buy 9.2% of Twitter and become its biggest shareholder. This is huge. That's because more than 330 million people use Twitter. It's a hugely important way for people to communicate, particularly in journalism and in politics. So it's been really disturbing to see how biased Twitter has been, how this social media giant has used its power to censor and suppress. For instance, it banned Republican Donald Trump from Twitter and helped Democrat Joe Biden, Trump's opponent in the last presidential election, by stopping users from sharing damaging news stories about emails found in the laptop of Biden's son, Hunter, emails suggesting a very strange misuse of Biden's office to make money. And it seems that Elon Musk, he worries about this kind of thing too. A week and a half ago, he tweeted, "Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy," and he asked his readers, do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle? 2 million people voted online and 70% said no, Twitter did not adhere to free speech. Joining me is Sky News US correspondent Annalise Nielsen. Annalise Nielsen, thank you for your time. What do you think Elon Musk is planning?
Well, I mean, you don't get to be a person as wealthy as Elon Musk without seeing some kind of business advantage to what he's doing. I'm sure he's going to make a lot of money, and we have seen in the past he's been in a bit of trouble with his use of Twitter, putting on things related to his stock prices. So the SEC has investigated that. But broadly speaking, I think this is actually going to be quite a pivotal moment for freedom of speech in the United States. We've seen pretty checkered history from Twitter about the suspension process and then the lack of transparency around that, especially when it comes to high-profile figures, of course, Donald Trump being the most high-profile person deplatformed by Twitter. So this is going to be a pretty critical moment where a lot of people are hoping that there might be a little more accountability about how that happens, because like it or not, Twitter is a pretty powerful platform.
It sure is. Elon Musk himself has got heaps and heaps of followers. It's unbelievable. Now, he talks about Twitter not practicing free speech, but it's not just Twitter, is it? I mean, 2 days ago, you saw the Washington Post, one of America's top left-wing newspapers, admit that it was one of the news organisations, and there were many, that had suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story and said that while it was right to be suspicious of that story at the time, the lesson here was that there was also a danger of suppressing accurate and relevant stories. Now, Annalise, tell us what the big news organisations actually suppressed in this story, and are you convinced that they've learned the real lesson?
Not really. And just to cap off the Twitter story, it is interesting to see that Elon Musk has 4 times as many followers as the President of the United States. So if we did start to see his name thrown around 2024, he's got a lot of influence there. But when it comes to the Hunter Biden laptop story, that was such a critical story that happened in the heat of the election campaign. So it was understandable there'd be extra scrutiny, criticism of it, but that doesn't mean it should have completely fallen by the wayside. And what we've seen now is this reckoning, and it's only because there's been a revisiting of the story, a continued push, especially, I should say, to the really credit of our colleague Miranda Devine at the New York Post. But what we have seen is this connection to funding from China, that Hunter Biden was using his contacts through his dad to make these deals with the Chinese. And that becomes a serious question of national security. Why this wasn't focused on sooner is a lot to do with the fact that a lot of people, especially in the media, were just horrified at the idea of another 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency and did just want to put this to one side where they didn't have to deal with it. And I think it's really interesting leading up to the Australian election right now. This is going to be the same thing, a very heated campaign. It's going to be really a high likelihood that there will be things dropped in there to throw people off guard. There could be misinformation, but that's our job at the end of the day. And I think the lesson for everyone in this is to not just get caught up following the pack. That if something like this comes up, it's worth taking your focus away from whatever public event they're doing, whose hands they're shaking, what state they're in, and looking at the validity of something, especially when it's as serious as what's come out with the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Well, I think that's a really good point to make, particularly with an election coming up. I mean, it's like with the Hunter Biden story. It just was not a story the media wanted to be true because it would damage the prospects of their candidate. And we see the same. The ABC right now, for example, they ran dead on the Mean Girls scandal of the Labor Party and now are hyping to an enormous extent what Scott Morrison may or may not have actually said 15 years ago about a candidate he was running against who happened to be of Lebanese background. It's just quite extraordinary. The bias always counts.